Hello everyone. Now to start with, I'm going to show you how I put in the stag that I've got in my magical forest. So as you can see, I've already done a bit of a basic outline of the forest. So I've added 4 trees, 2 quite large trees on either side, and then some 2 thinner trees beyond that, and then some in the background, in the far distance, a couple in the far distance. And I'm going to increase the number of trees, obviously, because in a forest you'll have a lot of trees. So I'm going to do quite a few more. I'm not going to do as many as there probably would be in a forest because I don't want it to get too overwhelmed with trees. So I've thrown out some trees and I've just kept it a little bit more simple. Now in terms of drawing the stag, I've started with the very first layer, as you can see, so just placing it in the landscape that I've already started with, and I'm making sure that although this is the very first layer, so I'm not worrying too much about the exact colours, not worrying too much about the details, obviously, because I can't do it details in oil at the beginning, because obviously the colours would just merge into one another. So I'm just doing as much as I can. And what I'm doing here is creating the basic shape, making sure I get the rough sort of idea of what I want, and using similar tones to the finished deer, but not being too concerned about mixing every single tiny colour to be exact to what I want it to be, because I'm doing so many layers after this that the finished result will be a combination of all the colours that I'm layering on top of each other. So everything is going to continue to change somewhat, and I can keep changing things because obviously the paint is wet and I'm doing many layers, so I can keep changing each layer. And I'm using what do you call a filbert brush, which is one that has a flat side. It's flat on both sides, and it's not particularly big. I would say that this is kind of ideal. This canvas is a lot bigger, as usual. I can't fit it all into the frame, but it's a lot bigger, so the details I can do with this brush because it's not too big and it's not too minuscule. And these types of brushes are very versatile because they've got a sort of tip at the end, so you can really create very fine detail as well as doing the bigger areas with the flat side. And you could do this sort of thing where you get a really big brush and then you can create sort of a stippling effect with the big brushes. I know some people do like to do that type of thing. It's not my personal style though. I mean, I am more of a detailed person, so even if it means painting in every single tiny leaf, which is what I'm doing, I don't mind that. I suppose I'm quite pedantic, which is my downfall really, because it takes a lot longer to do that. But at the same time I think, well, if you do a painting, it should be in the style that you enjoy, and not just to get it done really, really fast. I mean, this took about, I think, probably 5 or 6 days, so that's why I've not been uploading. I've just been working on this, and it was on purpose. I knew it would take roughly that long because I just wanted to do something that had a lot more kind of not necessarily just detail, but more atmosphere, and I knew that that would take some time. So as you can see as well, on the sky I've created 2 different types, 2 different tones, so that you can see on the outer section there is a darker blue, and then behind the deer there's a very light colour, kind of what would you call it, sort of sepia, I would say, very light. And that, again, that's just to create more depth and more perspective as well, so much deeper tones on the outside. And with the trees, I do really like the moss on the trees, the sort of mouldy looking trees. I love it when trees have green on the trunks, so I'm going to add even more green on these in the future, as you will see. And here we have another day, so I'm going back over these layers to continue to work on building up the different, not only tones, but getting the shadows and the shading just right. Again, I won't be able to do it just right on this layer, but I'm just trying to work towards getting it to look more like a deer and not like a sort of blob. It's so funny because with oil painting, it never fails to look like a disaster at the beginning. I think with other paints, you can get it really so good at the beginning, particularly with acrylic. But then again, oil has an unbeatable finish that I think cannot be matched by any other medium. So I think it's worth the effort. And with as you can see just behind the deer, I added some more trees because they are very far in the distance, much lighter than the ones closer towards us, and so sort of faded as if there may be a mist, and just a silvery colour, not too much detail again on those because they're so far away. It's almost as though they're kind of blurry. Like when you look in the distance, you don't see every single tiny detail on really distant objects. So just keep that in mind so you don't spend hours and hours doing little details on things that are just, you know, beyond your vision, because then I suppose it doesn't look, the depth doesn't really then appear and it doesn't look as realistic. And kind of getting in some sort of knobbly knee situation with this stag. I feel like it turned out as though it's got some really knobbly knees going on, but and I actually think that I maybe did the knees slightly too low. I did try to improve this later on. I don't know whether it worked out and whether it just looked like it's got some kind of a knee problem. Maybe this is a geriatric stag. I think it may be sort of really old because I feel like its face looks quite young, but its knees look like it's, you know, really knackered. But anyway, you can't have everything, I suppose. I knew I'd make some, you know, slight errors here and there. I don't think it's an error though. I mean, it's kind of, I knew it was happening. I just felt like it looked sort of comical, so I thought I'd leave it in. And it's starting to come together slightly now. As you can see on one side of the body of the deer, I'm really putting in some warm tones into the lighter colours. That's so that you can see it would be as if the sun is sort of shining through the trees and you're getting this sunlight effect on the fur of the deer. And that's really important because obviously a problem with using white is that, and it's a slight mistake that you can make, is that you sort of put white everywhere in terms of trying to get the lighter areas, and that tends to look completely unrealistic, I suppose, because you don't normally have light reflections being that really stark white. You want to add in different colours and different tones, because I think that nothing is ever really truly white, nothing is ever really truly black, only on rare occasions, or if they've sort of been artificially made, I suppose. So now I'm adding in the highlights on the kind of furry looking ground, as if you have this fluffy effect on the floor of the forest, and there is a kind of different shifts of light, so I'm sort of trying to make it look as though there is the light bursting through the trees. I do really like to create that almost like a story when you're looking into a picture or into a painting. I don't do it so much on my channel, but whenever I'm creating a painting that's away from my channel, I sort of have complete artistic freedom, I suppose. I would really make sure that there was a story involved in the picture, that you could sort of see through the trees and you might even see something beyond the trees. And I would have done that, except that because I feel it's easier, I don't want to make it too complicated, my paintings on my channel particularly, because I think it might confuse people and it may be a bit too obscure. But maybe in the future, I don't know, I might try it and see what people think, because I always do love the idea of storytelling in art or in anything. And so that kind of idea that you can really see into the scene and see into the distance and see into sort of, and see the unexpected, if you like. So I'm adding a few shadows, and because I've put a lot of light areas here with the yellow and the white on top of the red, the sort of reddy leaves, I've obviously got to add in the dark as well. So just don't forget that. If there is light, there is also dark. So never forget that aspect, because otherwise you can get carried away and then everything can look really light coloured, or everything could also look too dark. So just remember to keep going if you suddenly think, oh no, I've just lightened this up way too much. Just go back and keep readjusting. And so I'm sort of doing the little details here on the deer. It's funny because I feel as though the camera is quite forgiving when it comes to certain art, and I think that at the beginning of this, maybe a little bit, maybe half the way through, you could say, oh, you could have stopped there, but actually on looking at the canvas when you see it live and not through the camera lens, it actually looked quite terrible. Even more terrible perhaps than you would imagine. So I do really like my paintings to look good in real life, because sometimes it's sort of, YouTube can be a bit of an illusion in a way that some drawings or paintings can look very good on camera, particularly if you have the right camera settings, but then when you actually look at it in real life, you think, God, that's kind of not very not very detailed, not very interesting. It looks like you haven't shaded properly. So just to be aware of that, and I just wanted to make sure that I really got to a stage where I was happy with the painting, because otherwise I would set it down and I wouldn't ever go back to it. So so now this is, I think, the final day, and as you can see, I've really put a lot more green into the tree trunks. I really wanted them to look super mouldy. I always feel like that's just an amazing look to a magical forest. You've got some really mouldy, manky looking trees that look like they're really aged, and I could have even put in some giant mushrooms here. I was considering it, but then I thought I might do that in my next painting. So this is a little bit less magical, and maybe the next painting might be even more magical. So yeah, I suppose you have to create some variance, and I don't want to keep doing the same thing. So now I'm just doing the finer details, and as you can see, I haven't changed my brush. You don't have to constantly change your brush to create a painting. It's a myth. You don't have to go and buy so many things. Obviously, if you do have a very tiny brush, I think they're called liner brushes, sometimes people use those, very fine detail brushes. I do like them and they are good, but the problem is with me, I know that I can get too obsessed with the tiny little details, so I just left it off this time. I really wanted to keep this effect where it wasn't entirely blended together and you could almost see the separate colours, and I just like that idea, I don't know why. And just some tiny little flecks of white on the trees, some extra mould and a little bit here and there, and so that's it. And I did sign it somewhere, but it's a little bit off camera. So I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you enjoyed this magical scene, and I will see you all very soon, and take care.